One.
Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Stephen Falgout.
And I am your other host, Louis Falgu. Get Recc'd is our podcast where Stephen and I recommend each other some piece of media, be it an album, a film, a video game. The wrong thing is on the screen. And then the next episode, we get back together and we discuss those recommendations.
And that's the podcast.
Yeah, that's it, everyone. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be here in about 5 weeks. Hope you enjoyed with
This
episode
was
44.
our. We want to make sure to check in at episode 43 just to make sure everyone knows. This was an informational podcast where we just wanted to once again inform you of what the podcast was so you can get excited for episode 44.
Yeah, because episode 44 is the big one because there are 2 4s in it.
Yeah, that's 2 times the 4.
44.
Mm-hmm. That's how it works. That's the math.
Yeah. I don't remember what the last time was that we talked about. There was some podcast where we discussed the relevance of math to our podcast. I don't remember the episode, but clearly it is still true to this day.
Yeah, really, I just like to take a moment to thank math. You know, without math, we wouldn't even be here, if you think about it.
I'm thinking about it, and it's not adding up. Adding.
I mean, in this episode, we're going to be talking about Bastion and 100 gecs, and that's a 100.
That's a
That's a
lot of
number.
gecs. That is a lot
Yeah.
of gecs. And
And, and
that's not even counting the additional 1,000 gecs. So that's 1,100 gecs.
well, that is too much math for my brain.
All right. Well, with that said, then I think we should probably get moving before we start having difficulties hosting the show, just from sheer information overload, which I know already the audience is probably having a little bit of trouble following right now because we told them what the podcast was, we added numbers together. I think things are getting a little ridiculous. So, with that said, I think we should move to what you recommended to me last week, Stephen, if you would like to explain.
Right, really the antithesis of knowledge and information. Lewis, last time I recommended to you Bastion, a video game developed by Supergiant Games. It was published and released in 2011 by Warner Brothers. It's now made its way onto many platforms, and Supergiant Games has now become quite known in the indie scene. And I think they're working on developing their 5th or 6th game. Anyway, take it away, Lewis.
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of weird. I think last time when you recommended this to me, you'd said that this was one of the games that boosted indie games as a media, as a platform, I guess, a little bit, which is interesting. I mean, this is around the same year. Wasn't Limbo also 2011, or was Limbo 2010? Either way, it
Yeah, they're
was.
all about in the same time frame.
Yeah, like around, yeah, whatever the case, yeah, all around these like 2 or 3 years here. And I had not heard of this game before. Like, I know of games like Braid and stuff, which for whatever reason, when you recommended this to me, I thought it was Braid. And then I realized it wasn't. I guess I just got them mixed up. I did not know what this was. Pleasantly surprised, though. I played this on the Switch version, which I guess just goes to show that it is everywhere now, considering that this game's, almost 10 years old, and it's on the Switch, which is cool. Yeah, so, okay. This is a cool little game here. It's like, I guess you could call this, I don't know, would this be like an RPG? I guess kind of, right? Um,
Yeah, there's definitely RPG mechanics.
there's like elements like leveling up your character, leveling up your weapons, choosing different variations of abilities, and having to decide that before you go into any event. But I think at the same time, though, the game is very active in the sense that everything's kind of happening as it's happening. I mean, in a way, it almost felt like a little bit like a brawler too, maybe, from like a isometric perspective. In the sense that whenever you get into attacks with enemies, it really is just like it becomes like dodging and hitting and dodging and hitting. It's not like a turn based or anything like that, um, which I thought was pretty cool because it seems to combine elements from like what you would expect from both. Like every time before you go into a stage, you're gearing up using certain potions. I forget what they're called in this, but like they're basically potions. And choosing your weapon, leveling up your weapon, getting abilities for your weapon, and then going into these encounters that are very much like in the moment. Which was really like I don't know I don't know how unique that is. I don't know enough about video games to know. I'm guessing it's probably not, but whatever the case, like it plays really fun, and it's plays really tight as well. I would say it's just very like the main core gameplay elements here are like really strong.
Yeah, and I think that's really what Supergiant is most well known for, and really starting with Bastion as well is they really have this good sense of enabling the player to create their own progression path, but also making that progression path very rewarding. So, for instance, in this game specifically, you can kind of optimize yourself into different weapon types or play styles based on which, like, how you choose to select your talents and abilities. And that's something that they really continue on for pretty much every game that they've created. But the other thing is, I don't know of very many developers that do just raw combat mechanic action as well as Supergiant does. And just a little backstory of Supergiant, they actually were originally a couple of developers that worked under Electronic Arts kind of working on RTSs. So when they kind of spun off of that, and this was their first game, came as kind of a little bit of a surprise, and especially because it was during that whole renaissance of indie games with Microsoft Live with their Summer of Arcade promotion, which again is like where things like Braid and Limbo also came out of. They really have this great sense of scale and understanding of style and just polish that I think comes with having worked in a large industry and then translating that into an indie game. But then, as I mentioned, it's not just all of those aesthetic things that I think are very strong here. It's also just the raw mechanic. This is probably, I would say, mechanically their most simple. It's really centered around dodging and attacking. And as they've gone on and created more games, they still retain that simplicity, but have built on it in interesting ways. Like, for instance, their second game has kind of this like real-time turn-based pseudo action sort of thing going on. So they take it in like that farther of a direction. And then their most recent game is more like a roguelite where it's very much just boiled down action. And then they even had a game where they kind of, it's like this weird basketball sort of a thing. But at its core, they all retain that same identity of just very strong mechanics.
Yeah, and it's probably the first thing I noticed here. Like even just starting the game, it does a very quick job of getting you used to how to play it, and it pretty much gets you in as fast as possible. And also, I think the way that the game introduces its style is really cool as well. Like one of the things that this game does is it isn't an isometric perspective, but it's also like it's only really showing what's immediately around you because the world that you're in is made up of sort of like these floating islands. And as you move through the environments build up around you, as opposed to seeing the entire area all at once, which sort of happens as soon as you start the game and continues throughout it. And they start to do a little bit more with that as well. Like certain stages have you actually hitting pads to leap from island to island and things like that. Not stuff that makes the game harder necessarily, although you can fall off, so there are like things like that. But I think mostly it just makes it pretty visually interesting. Like it's a really cool game to look at. And I think that they set up, even despite this limitation, I think they set up the environments and the fighting environments pretty well. It didn't really seem to me like the environment was too small most of the time. Sometimes maybe, but usually if there was going to be some kind of big fight or big showdown, you'd have a lot more space to work with. Whereas in some of the tighter areas, you might just fight like one or two enemies at a time. Um, and I thought that was really cool. And yeah, I guess like even just going down to like the fighting mechanics, dodging and attacking, it's like it is very simple, but the game just plays so well. Like I think enemies telegraph their attacks really well, for the most part, and that just makes it like really satisfying to just sort of go and fight them when you only are really having two or three things to worry about. I mean, there's also blocking, and then there's range attacks, but it is not something that, at least to as far as I got in the game, I ever felt like I had to put like a ridiculous amount of thought into. It was just enough where it was challenging, but like, it was really really fun. And then, I guess I skipped over this because I was talking about style. Another thing this game does is, as you're playing it, there is a constant narrator, narrating the adventure, and this was an odd choice that I don't know how I feel about it still. I mean, in a way, it made the game feel like you were sort of engaging with the story almost from like a storybook kind of sense, where like you're playing it, but really you're like reading it as if it were a story at the same time, or hearing it as if it were a story at the same time, which is kind of cool. But I also think I found this jarring probably more often than not, in the sense just because like I guess it might have just been down to the voice acting or something, but something about the narrator, it felt kind of out of place from the style of the game otherwise, and it did, like, because it happened so much, it did become maybe a little bit alienating from actually it being able to fully engage with the game for me.
Well, one thing I do really like about Supergiant is they have this really great sense of world building, and I very much enjoy the narrator in this one, and they do similar things in their other games as well. But what I think's a little different, while I would definitely agree that it feels like a story unfolding, especially just all the way down to what you had mentioned before, where literally the world unfolds around you. It's almost got this like pop-up book sort of vibe where you're reading this story that's being presented to you as a narrator, and then things are coming up and disappearing around you. But the one thing where I feel like it still has that sense of player feedback or player loop is there will be some cases where, for instance, something will happen, like you might, for whatever reason, be repeating a fight a couple times, maybe because you've died or whatever, and the narrator will comment on things like that, which I think is actually pretty fun. Like, for instance, I vaguely remember a time where I basically fell off the world, and the narrator makes some like kind of snide comment about it, and those sorts of things add a little bit of flavor and a little bit of character to kind of building your own story in Bastion. Now, it is very much a linear narrative, like you are following a very defined narrative, but there are little side shoots like that that I think make it a little more interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I say I'm torn, because I do think it's a cool element. It was at first, at least. I guess maybe as time went on, I soured a little bit to it. But I mean, it's not a huge problem. At the very least, I think that it does make the game feel all the more fully realized. It makes the game feel more stylistic and um, a little bit more. I was gonna say characteristic. That's not the word I'm looking for, but we'll go with that. Um, it does, like, it does seem like a game, and this is something I notice in a lot of indie games compared to some of the bigger titles I have played. Like, it seems like indie games tend to really go out of their way to like make their game feel like this little piece of art, um, and like they're so a lot of these games are so um, um, I'm missing the word that I'm looking for. They're so focused on crafting every single element stylistically so that the game really feels like its own little thing. Um, I mean, you look at a lot of these popular games, and a lot of them, I would argue, a big part of the reason they're probably popular is purely because of their style. We talked about stuff like how many indie games have we talked about Limbo? I would even say Cuphead. I don't know if Cuphead's an indie game. I think so, right? It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, like all games like that, they always seem to be very, very focused on that stylistic element. And I think this game does a good job on that front. I don't know if it's as impressive as something like Cuphead, although, maybe that's a really unfair comparison. I say maybe, but that is a really unfair comparison. Or even Limbo, let's say. Like, I don't know if it's as stark as that, as impressive atmospherically as that, but it does what it needs to do for what this game is, I think, in a very good way. And it does feel like a really complete package. On top of that, I think like just the way the progression works in the game is very satisfying as well. Like even right down to the world map. You get a little area, I think it's called the Bastion, where you build up certain shops and things that you want to be in that area as you progress through the game. So you feel like you're getting stronger and having more things at your disposal as the game is getting harder, which was really nice. And yeah, I mean, just the general progression, the introduction of new enemies and sort of bosses, I guess, is very natural. And I never felt like anything was too much of a leap. And then there was something else. Oh, okay. The one thing I wanted to mention though is an enemy type that stayed through a lot of what I had played of the game. I think they're called squirts. If I have like one major complaint, it would just be these things, because these are like so irritating to fight. It is like they're these little flying bug looking things, and some of them help you and some of them attack you. And the way they attack is they kind of turn to you and stop for a second and then like teleport through you sort of and end up behind you. And the game will have these sections where you're fighting other enemies and it just spawns a bunch of these things as well around you. And it especially because of the way that the aiming system works with the ranged attack, which is whenever you actually start shooting range, it auto locks onto some enemy around you. It would often auto lock onto these things. And that on top of like having to deal with other enemies and having to block other enemies at once just gets really frustrating. Oh, I shouldn't say frustrating. I don't know if I was frustrated. It's more just kind of annoying. I felt like, especially early game, the game went kind of overboard using these enemies, because for one thing, I didn't think they were a very good practice enemy. I thought that the guys with the big like clubs were a lot better to get used to the game than these things were. And two, they weren't even really a good like atmospheric enemy that you could just fight every now and again as you were going through. Like, they were just kind of irritating the whole time.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think one thing about the squirts, which is kind of fun, is eventually, and I think you mentioned it, eventually you get ones that help you. So that's where kind of what I was alluding to before, where I was talking about how really you can kind of define your own sense of play style and how you want to go through the game, and that's one of the very many options that you can choose to apply to yourself, where you have like a little squirt that'll follow you, and there's a lot of kind of mix and match. And honestly, the game rewards you for doing so. Not as much as other Supergiant games have done, but you're not necessarily, it's not like you have to choose a play style and choose a set of equipment and say, this is how I'm going to play. You very much do have the flexibility of kind of trying new things pretty much anytime you want to, whenever you go back to the Bastion, which I definitely appreciate a lot as someone who just kind of likes experimenting and not feeling locked into any one specific way to play. So this game, I'll just say, kind of as my own summary, it's not necessarily revolutionary. It's just one of those games that I feel like defines kind of what indie is, honestly, from visual aesthetic to play, pretty much top to bottom. This game and Supergiant games are some of my favorite games of all time. As I mentioned, they're not changing the industry necessarily, but what they do incredibly well with such an incredible level of polish too, pretty much every time, no matter what comes out of this studio.
Okay, so do we want to actually get to wrapping it up then? I guess.
Yeah, let's go ahead and wrap it up.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I like this game a lot. I actually anticipate going back to it and playing more of it. Maybe finishing it. It's fun.
Yeah, and it's
It's
not that long either. I'll mention. I think maybe most it's like 6 out, like 4 to 6 hours, something like that.
I think it's like I think it's and it is very pick up and play too. Another thing I notice about a lot of these indie games is they tend to have not even even if they're not like an arcade style game, a lot of them feel like it in the sense that you can just like turn it off and get back into it, and it's very like spur of the moment. It's a good game for Switch actually, I think, because it is very like turn it on and just start playing it more. And I like that in games. If you haven't noticed by a lot of the stuff we've talked about, I think I tend to appreciate that. I think this game's a lot of fun. I think a lot of the elements feel very intentional. It's well crafted from the ground up. The style's cool. The gameplay is really tight and just really well executed. There are elements of this game that are either questionable for me at the moment or like annoying. I wouldn't say that this is amazing, but maybe if I finish it, I'll come around completely on it because I mean I could see that happening. It's very fun. I guess yes, I would recommend this. I think this is a game that anyone can like. I don't think I like RPG games. I don't really know. I haven't played a lot, so I don't want to like write them off completely. But I was able to get into this really easily. I think it's a game you can just kind of fuck around with. It's fun, and I would give it an 8.
And as I mentioned, I really enjoy Supergiant games. I don't know if at this point, after I've played most of them, if I would say this is my favorite anymore, but it still is one of my favorites to say the least. And honestly, would probably, although I might like other Supergiant games more, I think what this did for me at the time was just so different that it might honestly be in at least my top 20 games of all time. And it might even be higher than other Supergiant games that I like more, which I guess is kind of contradictory, but it's kind of like a time and place thing for me. So with that, I still give Bastion, I would say, probably a 9. I think it really is a complete package. I think the only thing that it sort of lacks is they've advanced this formula in very interesting ways throughout their further games. So this is very basic and simple in a way that I appreciate quite a lot. But I think as they've progressed that formula, I've just seen what else they could do in this space that I don't think I'd give it quite the 10.
Okay, and with that, should we move on to what I recommended to you, Steven?
Yes.
Okay, so last time I recommended to Steven the album 1000 gecs by 100 gecs. This album came out last year, got a ton of hype, just a ridiculous amount. They ended up opening for Brockhampton, even like later into the year, I think, right? Am I wrong about that? I remember that
Yeah,
happening.
they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did.
And yeah, I guess the album, you could call it bubblegum based. That's what people call it. I don't know what you could call this. I have no idea. So with that, Steven, go right ahead.
I don't know what I was expecting going into this, but it certainly wasn't whatever this happened to end up being. But I did really enjoy it, actually. And it's very different. Lewis, I think you already have mentioned it just by saying what you just said, but I don't know if I could really classify this into any one specific genre. Now, it definitely has a lot of elements of things like electronic and pop. And honestly, I know this says 2019, but I was reading on the Wikipedia page that apparently this actually came out in like 2015.
No, that
And
was
then it got,
it was an EP that they did. Um, was what came out in 2015. This out, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, they released their EP in July 2016, also named 100 gecs, but it was G with a capital instead of G with a lowercase. Um, Honestly, I see this influence in mainstream pop already, which is kind of crazy to me because I think this did come like this as the album definitely came out last year, which is weird because, first of all, mainstream pop is just like a whole thing right now anyway, where it's just this super drab, melancholic garbage. But this has kind of reinvigorated that for some artists, and I can already tell artists like Charlie XCX and some others have taken what's going on here and kind of integrated it into their sound. The reason why I find that so interesting is because track to track, this album goes in some very interesting, weird places. But I will say it starts with a banger and keeps going on with some bangers. Then it gets kind of weird, and it gets kind of weird throughout too. And there are songs like Get Geck where I really didn't even know what was going on, but I honestly enjoyed every moment of this. And probably my favorite part is that it's not very long at all. It's like 20 something minutes, and I think that's exactly as long as this needed to be to keep my attention the entire time.
Nice. Well, okay. This is gonna be the weirdest Get Recc'd episode of all time. Because I think this is like a case where this is the album you would probably expect the opposite of what's about to happen to happen. But yeah, fuck it. You know, we're always open to new things. Yeah. Okay.
So does that mean a third guest is going to come in?
Yeah, here we go. Hello, Mr. Brady and Miss Laura Les from 100 gecs. Welcome to Get Recc'd.
Wait, can I just say one thing real quick? This is like a complete, I would say complete non sequitur, but it was just something weird. Spotify lists the artist as 100 gecs, but also credits both of them along with the artist, like the 100 gecs as an artist. So every single song is 100 gecs and then the two individual names, and I was very confused. I thought that I didn't know that they were actually the group, so it was really confusing on Spotify to see the name of the group and the individual artists in the group.
I think it's just because Dylan Brady and Laura Les have been doing stuff before this and with other projects. I know Dylan Brady's like a producer. Laura Les has done some EPs. I don't know if she ever put out an album though, and he put out an EP or something. But anyway, yeah, I gotta say, this album is like, it is very strange. It is very crazy. It does a lot. It tries a lot. It is one of the most, if not the most, eclectic records that I've ever listened to. And on paper, there's a lot about it that seems interesting. If you had told me what this was going in, I might have said, hey, that sounds interesting. I mean, when I first heard the band getting mentioned, and I kind of heard what they were before I'd actually listened to any of it, I thought that it seemed like it could be pretty fun and pretty cool. But honestly, I absolutely fucking hate this album so much. Like, ground up, every single thing about this album, I do not think a single thing on this album is good. I don't think anything on this album is almost good. I think this album is as far from good as possibly anything I've ever heard is. Like, I mean, well, there's a couple things that might be worse, but like this, it's like every single thing that the group took and integrated into this project. I mean, there's stuff from like dubstep to ska to nightcore, which is what they say. They say they're nightcore, which I guess makes sense because they pitch shift their vocals and everything's really fast. And I mean, and pop and hip hop and trap and God, everything, every single thing that is on this album, they do terribly. I mean, I understand that it's like supposed to be really wild. I understand that it's like, I say I understand. I don't know if I do, but like it seems to me like every element that's here is just done really poorly. Like even right down to the production, which I've heard get a lot of praise. I mean, the only place I could see myself praising it from is just the fact that they did so much. But it seems like every single sound that pops up on this album is just terribly mastered. Like the mixing is all over the place. The dubstep sections of this, I don't even know how to describe them. I mean, it's like it's certainly not very sonically rich. It kind of sounds like paper. Everything sounds paper thin. I mean, God. And then when you get to the tracks like Get and what's the other one called? I Need Help Immediately, where they just go fully into the experimental direction and just like have sounds coming up like every couple of seconds. It is astonishing how bad every single sound sounds. God, I don't know, but like I know that like it's weird because everybody around me has been saying how much that, well, not everybody, I guess this album is pretty divisive, but a lot of people around me have been saying how great this is and giving this tons of respect and praise, and a lot of that I feel like might even be misdirected. I mean, a lot of it sure isn't, okay, but people often like to praise this by saying like, I have seen people do this anyway. I'm not calling out anybody in the chat because I don't think anybody in the chat here has argued this. But a lot of people claim this as some kind of like ironic pop masterpiece kind of thing. But it's not ironic. Like, watch interviews with these people. They're fully into what they're making. I mean, good for them. But like, it's not like it's a joke. It's not like it's like, oh, this is hilarious and stupid and this sounds terrible, that's why like we're doing it to like make fun of pop or stick it to pop. Like, no, these people like absolutely love pop. They love Nightcore. They love all the shit that they put into this album, and they just wanted to stuff it all together like this. Which, I mean, maybe for some people almost makes it more respectable. But I just like, considering what it actually turned out as, I can't even say that in some kind of ironic sense it's interesting, which almost reminds me in a way of like Andrew WK, where like some people claim it's ironic, but I'm honestly not sure. And I don't know, that just makes it very difficult for me to find any angle with which I can say like this is a good project.
I kind of like how paper thin it is, to be honest. I think it's very funny how it's like they're trying too hard in a way that I enjoy quite a lot. And pretty much every track you can sort of feel that. And in songs like Stupid Horse, where it's just this kind of electronic garbage, it's like good garbage. Like, I vibed with this in a way that I don't even know if I could really describe, because I don't really know, like, it's confused me, you know? Like, I don't know if I'll ever look at music the same way after listening to 1,000 gecs by 100 gecs, because this is absolutely something that I should have come onto this podcast and said how garbage it is, and yet here I am.
Yeah. I don't know what I expected. I was kind of hoping you would like it almost, but I'm surprised at the same time, because considering the stuff you've hated on this podcast prior, it is not something that anyone would expect you to like. And then on the flip side, considering the stuff that I've praised on this podcast, it is exactly something people would expect me to like. So this is a weird day, but I guess 100 gecs is a weird group, right? So
wow, how the tables have turned.
I guess that's fitting. Yeah, I mean, I just it's just what it's. I guess this has to be a case of like on some level of me like not getting it. But then again, I don't think I don't get it. I think I actually get it a lot, because I've watched their interviews. I think they're really cool artists, and the way that they talk about their music is inspiring, and it's really interesting. And I think hearing what they've said about this, knowing what they think about this, and how they perform it as well, if you see like any live things of them doing these songs, I have a pretty good understanding of what they wanted to get out of this. I would argue I have a better understanding of what they wanted to get out of this than a lot of this album's fans do, considering what some of the people who really like this, some of them, not all of them, of course, but some of the people have said about it, where they're just blatantly wrong, according to what the artists themselves have argued. And look, I'm not saying that because it's not ironic, that means that it's just absolute dog shit. inherently, like, in a way, I guess it is kind of admirable that this is an unironic project, that they're really just tried to make something super, super fun, and that's what they wanted to get out of this. And for a lot of people, that's what this is, right? So, like, I guess it is kind of admirable. In the same way, Andrew WK might be kind of admirable because the guy lives his shit, like, and I think there's something to be said about that, maybe, but like, God, I just think this is so awful. It's obnoxious, yes, but I think that's obvious, right? I think even people who like this would say it's obnoxious, because I guess that's part of the point. Considering every single thing is so either pitch shifted or super fast, or it sounds bad, or just whatever. Like, it seems like it was purposefully constructed at every single level to be as annoying as possible. Like, if you took the Gummy Bear songs and the old Hamster Dance song, and like Numa Numa, and all the old internet meme songs, and just shoved them into a blender, I feel like this is what you would get. And maybe it's just me. But
actually, you know what? I kind of am all about that. I'm kind of all about that because this one, it made me nostalgic for all that old internet, this track, or this album.
Well, it does have, like, a lot of people say it's like a summary of all of the trashiest music of the 2010s, which is actually a really good way to describe it. And I think they would probably agree to that description as well. Like, you think of all of the trends that you frequently hear people say are garbage, of course, trends that have their fans. But like, say you like have some like you're in 6th grade and your like white kid friend talks about how much he hates, he's wearing like a Pink Floyd shirt, and he talks about how much he hates dubstep, trap, and EDM, and just all that stuff, and how much better music was back in the day. Take all the stuff that kid would say he hates, and that's all the stuff that's on this album. And I do not hate that stuff, by the way. I really don't. I just genuinely believe that every single thing that they took from those genres, they did badly. So, like, and also, I don't know that these are things that really can come together. I guess somebody else could prove me wrong, but I don't think they did.
Well, they have grown to a lot of popularity, as you mentioned. They opened for Brockhampton, and I think they've even gone on their own tour a little bit now. So we'll see. My favorite part of this, Lewis, as you're talking about it, they list 303 as an influence, and
Yes.
when I read that, I was like, yes, that makes sense now.
It does! But, like, yeah. Anyway, I've already got it. I mean, look, No. I could try. It's one of those things where, like, I want to, like, keep giving concessions to this, but honest to God, I absolutely hate this. I don't want to be like, hey, but I can give it this, and I can't give it anything. I'm sorry. I'm not going to. I'm happy for them. I think they're cool artists. They're doing interesting things. And Bubblegum Bass, you mentioned Charlie XCX. I don't think she's influenced by 100 gecs, at least not yet, though I could definitely see her being. But as far as I know from her, she's been influenced by the PC music movement, which has come well before 100 gecs. And other, like, Bubblegum Bass artists. Again, I don't even know if that's a proper descriptor for this. It's just the best genre type they have.
They have done some production work for her already, actually.
Oh, did they really? Well, then, I guess I'm proven wrong. But again, like, artists that Charlie XCX has pulled from. I mean, we talked about Sophie, for example, and I think Sophie's worked with Charlie XCX, like on Vroom Vroom and shit. I'm pretty sure Sophie worked with Charlie, and like, and again, these are artists who all get lumped together a lot because they do kind of fit the Bubblegum Bass tag, I guess. But I feel like 100 gecs have really, like, done some other new crazy shit. But a lot of these artists have laid the groundwork for pop to draw from them in the coming decade. I mean, I'd be curious to see how this kind of thing does influence the mainstream. I mean, there have already been mainstream-ish pop artists that have taken into this sound, but I don't know about, like, full-on top 40 hit makers making songs that really draw from, like, Bubblegum Bass and shit. But it will be interesting to see if that starts to happen and how it does, I guess. And, 100 gecs will deserve credit. Whether I will ever like them or not, they will deserve credit for that. And so, shout out, I guess.
Should we wrap this one up, Lou?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so as much as I want to give this 10 gecs out of 10, just because it would be so numerically fitting, I think I give this an 8. I really enjoyed this. This is probably in the top echelon of albums that you've recommended to me that I have enjoyed. And the other ones being really definitely much better than this. But this vibed with me in a very specific way that I don't even know if I can properly describe. And for that case, it gets a solid 8.
Nice. I give it a 0. I just no positive.
The old 0 gecs.
The old fat 0. Yeah, 0 gecs. Hey, at least that is no, that isn't a multiple. Never mind.
No.
But if you add 10 to 0,
bring it up to 1.
If you add 100 to 0, you get 100. So, that fits.
Whoa.
I'm not bringing it to 1. It doesn't deserve it. I can't do it. I'm sorry. But anyway. Okay. Well, anyway, are we ready to move to recommendations then?
Yes.
Okay, then you go first.
Lewis, I am going to recommend to you the 1999 album Running with Scissors by one Weird Al Yankovic. Running with Scissors was the 4th album by Weird Al. And I feel like had the highest charting to date for Weird Al's albums. It also helped that there were Star Wars involved. But anyway, next time we will talk about Weird Al.
Okay, and Steven, I am recommending to you something that is not against the rules, though I think normally we would reserve this kind of thing for our Rereq trilogy later. But we never technically said we couldn't do that anyway. So I'm giving you The Money Store by Death Grips. This was Death Grips' major label debut, oddly enough, that they only stayed on for this one album. And it is also technically their first album because Ex-Military is a mixtape, but what's really the difference between a mixtape and an album? I don't know. So we'll call it their second album. I would say this was one of the 2 records, basically the first 2, that really broke them early on. And I guess it helped that it was on Epic. And that's all I'll say. I previously recommended No Love Deep Web to you before, though No Love Deep Web is not one of my favorites from them anyway, and because their albums tend to be so different one from the other, I would just be genuinely curious to see what would happen, how you would feel about a different Death Grips record. I don't know. I'm curious, though. It'll be interesting. But that's my recommendation.
Okay, so with that, Lewis, Lewis and I are here. We are present. We are doing this live, baby, in front of the studio audience. If you have any questions for Lewis and I, we have a little bit of time to take a few questiones.
Yeah, I suppose so. We've got Cubic showing up saying, hello, I just came here to say I love you, the music breakdown. I really appreciate it. Thank you, buddy. Speaking of that, I'm thinking of filming it today, actually. I'm going to put out a review of the new Green Day album, Father of All, soon. Be looking forward to that, because I'm not. Let's see. What have people said in the time? Is there anything to respond to that they have said? They were very happy with you for liking 100 gecs. I look, a lot of these people really have loved that album. I'm a bit of an outlier, I admit it, but
Dems the gecs, that's what I say.
yeah, get gecked. Ha 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 ha. It says correct.
We should rename our podcast that. If only we would have given it 100 gecs. Why am I a goat? I'm not a goat, actually. I'm a human. It is.
That's what he meant.
It is. Most people don't know that, but
Wow. I don't know. Looking from your picture, it was a little hard to tell. I had trouble.
I know pictures which we have talked about replacing many times, but yet here we are.
Maybe one day.
That's yeah, maybe
We should replace them with worse pictures that you could barely see, like bad
yeah,
lighting. That would be a good idea. I think people would like
yeah,
it.
with gecs, the video game character.
I should have wrecked Father of All. Maybe. Actually, no.
Gexed. That's what our new podcast is called.
Wow. Wreck.
Okay, well, with that, Lewis, do we have any administrative items?
Not really. I mean, we're on Castbox as always. Check us out.
Yes, and if you're listening on Castbox, we thank you. Typically, we record on Sundays. I am no longer going to say we record every other Sunday, although that is your best bet. So if you are interested in listening in live and asking us questions in the live chat, your best time to potentially be able to do so is usually every other Sunday around 8 o'clock. So that would put the next episode at March 1st, potentially. Now, we have not been very good about that schedule, but that is probably your best bet of trying to reach us if you do want to listen in live.
Yeah, on the YouTube channel Casting 404. I mean, you should be able to find us just by searching Get Recc'd on YouTube. But yeah, I really should stress the every other week thing. I don't even know if that's the best bet at this point. I don't know the last time we did two podcasts in 2 weeks. I don't know if we've done that in like a year. But, yeah, around Sundays. Yeah, check Sundays, I suppose. Or just subscribe to the channel, Casting 404, and then, then you'll always know. So anyway, I guess that is it, right? I don't think we have anything else to really say, right?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, well then with that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.